Welcome everybody to Book Sandwiched In, our first book review for the season. First book review for the season, thank you. And Charlie Paone will be reviewing the book, The Unlikely Thru-Hiker, an Appalachian Trail Journey by Derrick Lugo. Charlie is a retired speech-language pathologist and a former president of the Friends of the Steele Memorial Library. He has also bicycled, walked, hiked, and backpacked many a trail in the Continental USA. So without further delay, Charlie, welcome.
Thank you, Thank you for coming out. I think we should be outside, though, hiking. I think this is a problem. But I see that most of you did not bring your hiking boots nor your hiking clothes, so we'll have to do it some other day, okay? So I always like to start with the fact that I grew up and was raised, and most of my education occurred in Ohio, so there's always an Ohio connection to anything I present. And so my connection today is my cousin who lives in Dayton. Her daughter is in her mid-30s, and she's an avid hiker. And she likes to read as well, so we share different books that we read and different interests that we have. And we're hoping to actually ride our bicycles from Cincinnati to Dayton this summer, if we can find a weekend or a day to do that. But she is the one who recommended this book. And not only did she recommend it, but she said, I think I want to do this. And she's done a lot of hiking, so she probably could. And she's mid-30s, and she's not married, and she has a very good salary, and she can take time off. All of those are major factors if you're going to do any kind of serious hiking. So it's really my cousin and her daughter that are responsible for this presentation. So I'd like to start just with a few comments about why the Appalachian Trail. And that's the first chapter in the book. And I really enjoyed the book simply because there's so much humor. There's some education, even if you've been a hiker for long periods of time and have done many a hike. But there's a lot of positivity in this book, which makes it a little bit different than so many of the other books that have been written about hiking and trails. And there's probably at least 100 books on the Appalachian Trail and hiking the Appalachian Trail. The oldest woman to hike the Appalachian Trail, the oldest gentleman to hike the Appalachian Trail, the youngest hiker, the fastest hiker, the slowest hiker. But this book just really brings a real positivity to it that I have not seen in other books related to this topic. So the question is, who is Derrick Lugo? And the real answer is, we still don't really know, because there's not a lot of information about him in the book as far as what he does for a living or where he's coming from, except this. And I'm going to read this short paragraph to you. Derrick Lugo had never hiked or camped a day in his life. The Brooklyn-born New York City urbanite hopped a train to Georgia, grabbed a taxi at the station, and told the cab driver to drop him off at the beginning of the Appalachian Trail. Then he did as he has always done. He put one foot in front of the other and never looked back. Now, if you had Dean Butts as your scoutmaster, you would know that you have to prepare for these things. You just don't go out there and decide to hike a trail like this. And you have to pack and repack and take your pack apart and eliminate things that are going to weigh you down, because you really want to get into a backpack that weighs maybe somewhere around 25 to 30 pounds if you're really good, or maybe somewhere between 25 to 35 pounds. And obviously, to today you can do that much more easily than you could back in the 60s when I started backpacking. And the equipment is so much easier to handle and so much lighter, and it makes things much more reasonable. Their tents now weigh 3 pounds or some even less. Some people will use hammocks just to decrease the weight. Stoves are not as heavy as they were back in the 60s. So there's a lot of factors that go into this, and the weight is so critical if you're going to be hiking the trail from one end to the other. A through hiker is exactly that, someone who hikes the Appalachian Trail from one end to the other. And it starts in Georgia and goes all the way up to Maine. And this is a map of that a friend lent me to show you where the trail is and all the 14 states that it goes through. And you think if you start in Georgia and you finally get to Maine, you think you're almost there, right? But you still got another 200 plus miles to hike. And that's got to be a mind blower as far as I'm concerned, but you still have a long ways to go. The shortest section of the Appalachian Trail, and we can all do that next week when it's a little cooler, is 4 miles, and that's through West Virginia. And the longest is Virginia, with over 200 miles, 260 or so miles. So we've got quite a variation of distance from one state to another, but 14 states. I'm going to also comment on the fact that we'll make some comments that Derrick has made, but we'll also make some comments that some of my friends who have actually backpacked the whole trail have done. Myself, I probably thought about it for a minute or two when I was in my 20s and said no. I just don't have the perseverance for that. I don't have the ability to really structure the whole idea of a trip like that. And you know, after about a week or two, I have found in my backpacking experiences, I'm really happy to go home and take a nice shower and sleep in a really nice bed. And you can do that if you're through hiking. But, you know, putting that tent down every day, sleeping in it, and then having to pick it up every morning to continue on, that just doesn't sound like a lot of fun to me. You know? So I'm a day hiker mostly. I enjoy being out in the wilderness. I enjoy nature. And I do like to hike. The problem sometimes when you belong to hiking groups is that everyone's so excited to be out there, they're talking so much that they scare all the animals away. And that's kind of why I want to be out there, is I want to see what birds I see and if I see anything else that might catch my eye. And that's an important factor of why you go out. But everyone goes out to hike for different reasons. So let's start with a little humor, thanks to Derrick Lugo. So he is an urbanite from Manhattan. We really don't know what he did. He did, at one point, was working comedy clubs. And if you read the book, you'll realize he does have a great sense of humor. And he's very, very positive. And I think that's the thing that really struck me in reading the book, was how much fun he seemed to be having and how much fun people had being around him. And to me, that's a really an important aspect. So this is a little bit of the dialogue that went on when he's in Manhattan. Well, let me stop. Let me go here first. The only hike he ever did, according to the book, before this, was he was in Italy, and he hiked up a hill, and there was a nice palatial table filled with food and wine, and he ate and drank, and he didn't remember how he ever got back. So, this is him talking to some of his friends in Manhattan when he is growing that seed of hiking the Appalachian Trail. I think I'm going to do the Appalachian Trail. And his friend says, the what? The Appalachian Trail, what? And his friend says, what is that? And why would you do that? Oh, it's a hike from Georgia to Maine. And why would you do that? Because it's there, I can do that. I can do that. Remember, I can, and here's one of the interesting comments, that because we don't know a lot about him, I can run 10 miles without breaking a sweat. So, he must be pretty physically fit, right? And he does that in Central Park. Okay? It's an adventure. What are you going to eat? Oh, I'll stop at restaurants on the way. And what if there's not a restaurant? Oh, I'll have cell service. Well, cell service in the mountains is a little sketchy at times. Okay? I think I'll try to do it in 5 months, you know. You're going to live in the mountains for 5 months? Listen, you're that urbanite, that guy who needs to be groomed, who needs a mirror, who needs beauty products, designer clothes. How are you going to shower? Oh, I'll shower every 3 to 4 days. No way, man. Maybe once a week. Hey, friends, Derrick's gone wild. He says he's going to do the AT. The AT? He's joining the A-team? No. The AT? What? Oh, he's going to take the A-train. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand it. So everyone's having a lot of humor and fun with Derrick, and he's having it back with them. So this is the kind of dialogue and interaction that you'll see throughout this book. And it makes it a lot of fun, and it's very interesting. So from that point, I want to just talk to you a little bit about the Appalachian Trail in general. The highest point on the Appalachian Trail is Clingman's Dome, which is on the border of Tennessee and North Carolina. And actually 6 of the 10 highest peaks on the Appalachian Trail are along that ridge line between North Carolina and Tennessee. Derrick has had no experience putting up a tent, has no experience hiking, and so he packs his bag, his backpack. Gene, you're going to love this. He packs 2 weeks of food, 5 books, 24 pouches of tuna and salmon, and plenty of cookies. So he gets to the start, and he's struggling. And he hasn't really even started yet. And he's being helped by other individuals that are going to be starting the trail as well. And one of the persons says to him, you know, man, you need to really maybe consider how much weight you want to carry, you know? They weigh your pack when you start, and his was weighing around 42 pounds. Okay, so that's a little heavy, but I mean, you know, soldiers will do that without too much trouble, but not everybody wants to do that. And so what he does is, with each stop that he makes, each night, someone who is also a thru-hiker will help him kind of decide what he does need and what he doesn't need. Because you do need a poncho, you do need a stove, you do need food, and you do need water. And water's heavy. A gallon of water is 8 pounds, so you can take a water filter, which will clean the water, or you can use iodine tablets, which makes it taste disgusting, but you know, it's up to you, whatever you like to do. Or you could boil the water, but that would take forever, and you'd use a lot of your fuel in doing so, so you don't really want to do that. But it makes it an interesting decision on what to take and what not to take. And back in the 60s when I was in Scouts, we would always pack and unpack at least 3 or 4 times before we went out. And you know what? I would roll my clothes and I'd put them in plastic bags so I could pull out a plastic bag and I'd have a t-shirt and underwear and socks and a shirt in that bag. And that worked out really well. Then I met my wife, and she didn't like the idea of rolling clothes because she said, oh, they get wrinkled. But then one day we're watching Rick Steves, and Rick Steves says, roll your clothes. My wife had an epiphany. She didn't believe me, but she believed Rick Steves. Okay? I had to give her that one, right? Thank you, Marianne. So, there's a lot of lessons that you'll learn on the trail. And here are some of the lessons that Derrick learned. Not only does he need to learn how to pack his backpack, but he needed to learn how to put up his tent. He needed to learn how to make sure no wild animals took his food. And he needed to learn how to drink non-fashionable coffee. So sometimes it was cowboy coffee, which is just where you throw the grains in and boil the water and drink it. He did not have any lattes out on the trail or anything of that nature. He didn't realize how to use a water filter. He didn't know where he was going to take a shower, and when he did try to take a shower, he had a mess. He fell and got dirtier than he was before he was going to take the shower. So the thing that I appreciated about that was he was not afraid to tell you of the mistakes he made. And I think that really made this book very enjoyable as well, because it was just a lot of fun. And we've all made these mistakes, and sometimes we still make these mistakes because we're just not thinking clearly, or we're in a hurry, or we just have to take that special t-shirt, you know. But I think that's what makes this book so human and so enjoyable to read. He does also learn the fact that rain is a given, especially if you're going to travel 6 months, over 2,000 miles. And I like what he says about the rain. He says, the most essential tool in rain is that you accept it. You just live with it, you know, because that's what it's all about. It's just enjoying being out there, whether it rain or shine. We can't have perfect days for hiking or backpacking or bicycling or canoeing or whatever we do, golfing every day. So it's just the idea that we accept what we do and accept the weather as it comes. Snow can also be a problem. Most of these hikers will start in March or early April. The Thru-Hiker will start in Georgia and work their way up to Maine. But even given that, there's a very strong potential for snow when you're in the mountains of Tennessee, North Carolina. And I've not talked to anyone, I know 3 Thru-Hikers, I've not talked to anyone Thru-Hiker who has not had to deal with snow at some point during their hike. In fact, one of our good friends from rehabilitation, he was a young man, 27, 28. Parents weren't happy, but he decided to quit his job, and he was going to hike the Appalachian Trail. And they gave him their blessing to do it finally, but he had a lot of family support. He had family come every 2 or 3 weeks to give him new equipment or more food, but also there to support him by hiking with him for a day or two. And that was really, I think, from a mental perspective, a very positive adventure for him. He ran into snow in the mountains of North Carolina, Tennessee, where he was hiking and the snow was up to his waist. And I just can't imagine how he could have done that. But where there's a will, there's a way, and he's a very determined man, so he's very skillful, and he knows what he's doing. So he was very fortunate. And he would send us, I gave him postcards of every state that he was going to go through, and I put a postage stamp on it, and I put my address on it. And as he went through every state, he wrote us a little note and sent it to us. So it was really nice to have that recollection that he was doing well and what he had experienced. And when he came over for dinner one night after he had finished the trail, I gave it back to him. I gave him all those postcards back. And I said, here, this is for you because you need this. You will appreciate it much more than I will. So snow is always a possibility. In the book, Derrick is very fortunate because he gets into a barn and he decides to put his tent up in the barn, which seems kind of odd. Why would you do that? But that was a very smart move on his part because there was a huge window that was open and the snow started coming and the wind was howling and there was like a foot of snow in the barn when he woke up the next morning.
Wow.
So this is not for the faint of heart, I would guess, we could say, right? Rain and snow are never a good idea, and that can happen. And one of the things I hate more than anything, because I don't go out and do any serious camping when it's snowy weather, but I hate rain and cold. It's one thing to be wet, one thing to be cold, but if you're both, that is not good at all. And then you always have to worry about wind and water. And they're called the widow makers because the wind can knock over trees or the water can make you slip and fall and you might drown. But they're called widow makers by hikers, okay? You might think wildlife would be an issue too, but for the most part in hiking experiences, the bears have been pretty gentle and standoffish, so we've never had too many problems with that. And he seems to not have much of a problem with that either. And one of the things that I think is very special about Derrick is the fact that he's suspicious because you remember, he's from New York City, he's a Manhattanite. And you know, people aren't friendly, they're not nice. And he gets on this trail and people are helping him. They're teaching him how to put up his tent, how to fix his backpack so it's lighter, and how to put the straps on correctly. And he's realizing that there's really a lot of nice people out there in the world. And that is one of the great lessons I think that he learned out there and how much joy he had from that. But he also gave a lot of joy to the people he met. One of the things, if you are a thru-hiker, is that you develop a name that people will give you. So, believe it or not, he was given the name Mr. Fabulous because people just enjoyed being around him. He had a good sense of humor, he was very positive, he was very upbeat, and he was willing to learn. And to me, that was another golden nugget from the book that was well worth reading. And you don't have to be an outdoors person. You don't have to be a hiker or a backpacker to really enjoy this book. And I think that's another aspect of the book. Most of the book actually takes place south of Mason-Dixon line. He does kind of finish it off very quickly, like in the last 100 pages he makes the last 7 or 8 states. But most of the book takes place below the Mason-Dixon line. And some of the trail names that we came across in the book were steps, because the lady kept telling everybody she's taking one step at a time, so that was her name. Overdrive was another young man who he really enjoyed, because overdrive just was so fast in hiking. Downhill was another one, and that's because this gentleman, who was older, but younger than me, he went a lot faster downhill than he did uphill. And then there was Swiss, the girl from Switzerland, and the honeymoon hikers. The honeymoon hikers had extravagant backpacks that weighed more than anybody should. But they were chefs. And what they did is they would hike on the trail with all this equipment and then make these fabulous meals for the hikers. And that was their joy to do that for them. There's also something on the trail called trail angels. These are people who live near the trail or will come to the trail, and they'll drop off like new equipment or cookies or food, or they'll invite you to their home to stay overnight and take a nice shower and sleep in a nice bed. And, you know, from a Manhattanite, you don't expect that, do you? So, what an education he's getting by being on this trail, one step at a time, and enjoying himself in nature. He said one of the most fantastic experiences he ever had was the first morning when he woke up and heard birds singing. Now, you and I take that for granted, but not him. And he was just overwhelmed by that. And you don't need an alarm clock on the trail, because those first rays of sunlight will wake you up. And if not those, your fellow campers will wake you up as they're taking down their tent, putting their backpack together and heading off. It's not unusual to develop friendships on the trail and hike with people. And he called it the moving village. And I love that concept, the moving village, that you're walking with people and you're communicating with them, and they're there to help you and you're there to help them. And at times you're hiking together, other times they're ahead of you, sometimes they're behind you, and sometimes you'll say, we'll meet up in a location. And throughout the hike, all the way up to Maine, that is one of the things that occurred. And he just had a really great bonding experience with all these people that he met on the trail. So here's the caveat. I'm the wrong person to give you this story. I'm the wrong person to analyze this book. Because if you haven't read the book, Derrick Lugo has dreadlocks. He's a black man. And if you're like me, you've seen very few people of color hiking trails or backpacking, and especially being a thru-hiker on the Appalachian Trail. But he doesn't really talk about that until about chapter 13, when he's still in Virginia, and someone stops him and says, "You hiking the Appalachian Trail?" "Yes, sir, I am." "Well, in all my years, 20 years or so, I've only seen 7 black people on the trail." And, you know, he could have been easily offended by that. But he wasn't. He said, well, I'm here and I'm really enjoying myself. And I'm having a wonderful time. And so rather than take that as a negative and a bone of contention from his perspective, he embraced that. And the gentleman who was talking to him also embraced it. And he said, I'm so happy to see you here. I'm glad that you're doing this. I'm proud of you. And I hope you make it. And then another chapter or two later, Derrick is walking through one of the campsites and he starts to stumble because he can't believe what he's seeing. There's a black lady who's a thru-hiker. And he is so perplexed that he isn't sure which way he should be walking or what he should say to her. So they do have a short conversation, and she is a thru-hiker. And we don't really get to know her very well because that's the only really comments that he makes about her. Her name was Steps, one step at a time. But it's nice to know that there can be some diversity out there and that we can all be together on that. So I think that's a really important thing from my perspective. And I wish I knew some black hikers, but I don't. So there's a lot of slang that goes on the trail. A hobo is a person who's going from south to north. You can do the trail any way you want. And you can be a thru-hiker any way you want. Most people go from the south to the north. Because weather, you can start earlier in Georgia than you could in Maine. Some people are what they call a flip-flop. And a flip-flop might be someone who starts in Maine and hikes to Martin's Ferry. That's not the name. Harper's Ferry, yeah, Harper's Ferry, thank you. Start at Harper's Ferry, and start in Georgia, hike to Harper's Ferry, then get in a car, drive up to Baxter State Park, hike up Mount Katahdin, which is the end of the trail if you're going north, and then come down Mount Katahdin and hike back down to Harper's Ferry. That's a thru-hiker also. It's just a flip-flop. Very few people actually go from Maine to Georgia. About 75% of the people actually go from Georgia to Maine. And as we said earlier, it takes about 6 months. There are knee roads. And a knee road is a day where you take a short hike. So you might only do 5 or 8 miles. When you first start on the trail, you'll do somewhere between 8 and 12 miles. When you are really starting to get very physically fit, you're doing 15 to 20 miles a day with a full pack on. I was going to meet up with Shane in Connecticut, but he was moving so fast that I knew I was going to slow him down, so I never did meet up with him. In Connecticut, I thought, well, Connecticut's fairly close, we can do it. Connecticut's fairly short. It's only 50 miles in Connecticut, the trail. But I thought, he did Connecticut in 2 days. I wasn't going to do it in 2 days. It was going to be more like 5 for me. But anyway, there's also what they call slack packers. And I had never heard of this until Shane was talking about it. And then I found out that one of my friends from high school was a slack packer. And a slack packer is someone who has a backpack, but they give it to an individual and they drive that pack to a location up the trail. And so the person is just hiking with a day pack, which would make life a lot easier. Solo camping is something that Derrick talks a lot about. Because, you know, being an urbanite from Manhattan, he's used to a lot of people being around him. And he thought it was very scary the first day, the first night that he solo camped. And every time he heard a noise, he thought a bear was coming after him. But it wasn't. It was just the trees creaking or the wind howling. Or maybe some rain or snow or both. He was really afraid of animals because he had never experienced animals in the wild. And all of a sudden there was a paw that came under his tent. And he got really freaked out. He thought, oh my God, a bear, what am I going to do? Well, it wasn't a bear, it was a puppy who had lost its owner. And so he took the puppy in for a couple of days, but tried to find the owner. For two reasons. One, it wasn't his puppy. And two, he really didn't have food to feed the puppy. So that was a big problem. And you know, and people do hike with their dogs, and that's good as long as they're trained well and they don't create a disruption, you know, to other hikers. As I said, the kindness of strangers is what really makes, I think, this book so special. Now, if you're like me, we've done sections of different trails. We've done sections of the North Middle to Lake Placid Trail. We've done sections of trails in New Mexico and Arizona. We've done a lot of hiking in Michigan, which you don't think of as maybe a hiker's paradise, but a fisherman's paradise. But it's an outdoors location that's really got a lot of beautiful territory. On the Appalachian Trail, New Hampshire and Maine are considered probably the roughest spots. New York has very little elevation. Pennsylvania is at Pine Grove Furnace, which is a state park, is the actual midpoint of the trail. But Harper's Ferry is actually the psychological midpoint. And they have a center there where you can drop off goods for Thru-Hikers, where you can get information. And we did that for Shane when he was hiking the Appalachian Trail. We dropped a nice big box off for him. The thing that struck me funny about that was his #1 request was whiskey. He said, I want little bottles of whiskey. He said, it's a great trading item. You can get a lot of food for whiskey. So it was that was really kind of an interesting perspective. So here are 6 of the toughest sections of the Appalachian Trail. Southern Maine, 100 miles. Steep, eroded sections. The Hoosick Notch is 1 mile of shoving your pack, climbing up on all fours, and using roots and rocks to move from one place to another. The White Mountains are also a second tough section. That's another 100 miles. It's all above tree line. Switchbacks are non-existent. There's not much you can hold on to. The markers for the trail are just painted on the rocks. And you gain and lose about 1,000 foot of elevation every mile. So that can be very difficult. The one that scares me more than that, though, is what they call the roller coaster in Virginia. And that's only 13.5 miles. And it's 10 climbs. It's climbing and descending. And they call it the Quad Buster. So you better be prepared for that. But you've already hiked through Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, so you've had some experience, so you should be on your way. Pennsylvania. A couple of ladies stopped me earlier today and made comment about Pennsylvania, and we had to agree. Rocksylvania, it's called. There's just too many rocks in Pennsylvania. And it's called also where boots go to die. You will ruin more than one or two pair of boots in Pennsylvania. And I've got a couple hanging from my rafters in my garage that can attest to that. Seems like, the average thru-hiker will wear 5 pair of boots in his travels. And you have to break them in, you know, before you put them on. So you break them in while you're still at home. And that's another thing that, again, where Derrick, I'm just not really sure where he's coming from. I mean, it's a great story, and I think he's telling a good story, but some of it just doesn't ring true for me, you know, especially his preparation and his awareness of what to do. Maine and Mount Katahdin, it's the longest climb in the trail. And that's at 5,268 feet. It's about 10 miles round trip. A lot of backpackers will leave their backpack at the bottom of the mountain and just use a day pack to go up, because you're climbing on ridges, you're climbing on sheer face, you're holding on to rungs that have been pounded into the stone, and it's not an easy hike at all. And the wind can be very dangerous when you're on what they call the knife's edge of Mount Katahdin. And then another part is in South Virginia, which is 150 miles. And that's just ridge after ridge after ridge. And you're just going up and down, up and down. So not as bad as the roller coaster, but still you're doing a lot of elevation. Now, one of the things that I've heard from a lot of thru-hikers is that, you know, they get into this mode where they're going to do this. They're going to hike the Appalachian Trail from one end to the other. But then they end up hiking very quickly because they want to get it done, and the weather's not going to be too nice if you're not finished before the end of September. So many thru-hikers say, I want to go back and I want to enjoy certain areas, because I really didn't enjoy it while I was there. I was more on a time schedule than I was in an enjoyment schedule. So to me, I guess that also feeds into the way I look at things, and that is that I'd rather just enjoy the trail than to feel like it's a destination that has to be met in a certain amount of time. But there is a lot of intrigue in being a thru-hiker, and you do meet a lot of fabulous people. 75% of people who say they're going to do the trail do not finish through hiking the trail. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Money is one, time is one, family is one, mental and physical preparation are an aspect of it, and poor planning. Actually, one individual that Derrick met, he was called the procrastinator. He was not prepared at all, and he was bumming food off of people and bumming water off of people as he was hiking. And he's just shortly mentioned in the book, so it's not very indicative of what happened to him in the long run. But Derrick had a really great experience, and now he thinks he can pretty much do anything. And he enjoyed being called Mr. Fabulous, but you know, his friends wouldn't call him Mr. Fabulous when he got back home. So I'm going to leave you with Derrick's quote at the end here. And This is what Derrick would say to everyone when he went to bed, or when they would leave and go on different paces on the trail. He would say, peace, love, and all that good stuff. So I do encourage you to read this because it's a very positive experience. It's a lot of fun if you've been outdoors, or if you even want to just live vicariously someone who has actually done this event, you know. I mean, I lived vicariously as a kid with Kon-Tiki and with Edmund Hillary climbing Mount Everest. And I still think I'm going to live vicariously on the Appalachian Trail. So I thank you for your attendance. If you have any questions about the book, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Any thoughts? Yes, Martha?
I loved that, by the way.
Did
You
you?
made it so interesting. I wasn't sure I would be interested, but now I'm fascinated.
Now you want to go, right?
No, I just finished a mystery novel about an inn that's on one of the trails that leads up to the Appalachian Trail. And they spoke of the number of people who have disappeared on the trail. Did Derrick mention any of those?
No,
Those who start out and never are seen again.
that's not part of the book. The book is very positive. It
Yeah.
doesn't, and I mean, he does make comment on a couple negative individuals. There's 2 or 3 that he mentions. A couple who are been drinking way too much on the trail. The procrastinator who was bumming food and drink and things. So he does make that. The dog owner, the dog owner in the book, who actually owned the dog, Derrick was really torn because he didn't feel the guy was a very nice man. But it was his dog, so he did turn the dog over to him. But he kept thinking, man, I should have kept the dog. But then rationally he said, I don't have the skill or food or energy to keep this dog.
What did Derrick do in his life in New York City before he took up thru-hiking?
Well, that's what I want to know.
Oh,
Because that's one of the mysteries, is that he doesn't tell us that.
Not even on the back side?
No, not even in the back. So as I said, he did perform in a comedy club, and I wanted to know that.
How old was he when he started?
He doesn't tell us that either, but I got the sense he was probably late 20s, early 30s. I also got kind of the sense, and maybe this is incorrect, that he must have been a man of means of some sort because of where he lived and, you know, how he presented himself as a very well-dressed man of color and fashionable, you know, all the toiletries he had, needed, you know, all the clothing that he had, you know, he had a closet full of clothes, et cetera, et cetera. So, but no, he never did. And that was one of my biggest disappointments, is I didn't know who he was, and I still don't really know who he is. And even going into the, you know, the biography, they don't tell you that. They don't tell you anything. Yeah.
Can you Google him?
Is it deliberate?
Do you know what I mean? Because it's a better story if you don't know the rest of it.
Well,
And it
yeah.
makes you curious.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. I didn't look at it that way.
You know what I'm saying, though?
Yeah, I do, yeah. Yeah, so why is that important? It's really not important.
Maybe it's important, but it's not important. It's
Yeah,
important.
right.
That intrigued me, too.
But I'm just-
I'd be the same way
yeah.
too. I'd be trying to find out who he was.
And I actually looked him up online. I
And
couldn't.
as you talked, I finally just thought in my
Could
head,
be,
that's a...
yeah.
The only thing I found out about him was he wrote this book.
I wrote this book.
Yes, Frank?
Yeah, how many thru-hike each year?
Pardon?
How many thru-hikers are there each year?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure I know that. There's over 1,000 that start.
Okay.
So if you say 25% are only make it, so there's your answer. But I'm sure it varies from time to time. You know, obviously some people do it because they're lost and they need to find themselves. Some people do it because they're young and able. Some people can do it because they have the means.
I think there was a blind hiker who also was a through hiker. Of course, he was going with someone.
Yeah, you know, there's all kinds of books about the Appalachian Trail and different kinds of people who
Yeah.
hike the trail. Like the oldest woman and the oldest gentleman. And actually, I was just on the Erie-Lackawanna Trail on my bicycle the other day, and I stopped at a bench, and I was sitting there, and this guy comes walking by, and we got talking. Very nice gentleman, very nice gentleman. He's a few years older than I am. And he said, oh, you know, I hiked the Appalachian Trail. I said, really? He said, yeah, from one end to the other. And I said, oh, you're a through hiker. And he's a couple years older than I am, and I'm thinking, because he told me his age, and I'm not going to tell you my age. And I said, I'm just so impressed. I said, I don't think I could get up and down with my knees and hips at this time. But he's been hiking ever since he was a kid, and he's got all kinds of awards in Pennsylvania for his hiking and trail maintenance and things like that. So he's a real outdoorsman.
Boy Scout.
On that note, my brother, who is a huge hiker and biker and maintains the trails, as does his girlfriend, she's the CEO of the Appalachian Trail Conference.
Right.
Have you ever considered doing a hike abroad? Because my brother's most recent trip was from Spain to France through Andorra, the Pyrenees.
Oh, nice.
Loved it, and he can't wait for the next, overseas trip.
Yeah.
So he's how old is he? A year younger than I am. I'm so jealous.
Well,
Yeah,
we
he's
did.
done it all.
We did hike the Dalmatian coast a number of years ago,
That's
and that was beautiful. That was really beautiful,
That's
And we're contemplating the Camino in Spain
right. That's what
next year, but we'll have to wait and see.
Right, and that's similar stories where people are meeting
Yes.
people along the way.
Yes,
helping
yes.
people to get
And the
there.
movie The Way is a really great movie if you haven't seen that, with Martin Sheen. But there's so many, and walk across Britain, that's something I keep telling people I want to do, but nobody wants to do it with me. And so I think my clock is running out, Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, hi. Who maintains? Does each state take care of their?
Well, there's over 2,000 volunteers that maintain the trails, and there is a conservancy too that maintains the trail. So
I would think.
people that are outdoorsy really want to keep it outdoorsy.
Storm, I'm sure they want to.
Well, yeah, that's true, because we were up in the Adirondacks about 2 weeks after it was a major blowdown, but someone had come through and they had actually sawed the sections that were on the trail and taken those pieces and put them on the side, so that all you had was that little section of the trail that you could walk through, and the down trees were on your right and left, and it was for like 5 or 6 miles. Yeah.
Wow.
So, but people do that. They love to do that, and these are outdoorsmen that really just enjoy being out there and doing it. And not all of them were Boy Scouts, but probably most of them were. Yes.
Another humorous book is by Bill Bryson, I'm sure you, I read it about.
A Walk in the Woods.
Walk in the
Yeah,
Woods. Oh
yeah,
my God,
yeah.
laugh out loud.
Oh, yeah, that is a fun one. Yeah. But the thing I liked about this book, again, I'll say it, is the positivity of how this man met and found so many positive aspects to being out there. And he was such a novice, that it really kind of scares you when you think about all the problems he could have had or should have had, but he made it. He survived. Thank you all for being here on a beautiful day. Go out and hike.
Happy trail, right? Yeah, Bill. Holy shit, yeah, it's really.
Thank you very much.
Appalachian
We
Trail.
don't need to do anything with the chairs, we're leaving the chairs down, there's a follow-up program. But I just wanted to remind people that our next book review is next Friday, April 21st. Jim Hare will be reviewing Lincoln's Final Hours by Catherine Canavan.
No.
So same place, same time, hope to see you next week.